Good morning. One Virginia dude here this morning. Oh, man, has it been hot the last couple days. I was doing some stain work outside at the other house yesterday with my stepdaughter and her significant other, and it hit 101, and it was pretty humid too. But hey, we got it done in a little over 3 hours before it really got super hot. Drank plenty of water. That helped. Um, anyway, yeah, I was looking at the news, and the New York City had their Democrat primary for their mayoral candidate, and Zohran Mamdani, I apologize if I'm butchering his name a little bit, won out of it was a pretty crowded field. I'm assuming he won by a plurality, but he beat Andrew Cuomo, the former New York governor. Um, I don't know. I wasn't sure. I thought Cuomo might win, but nevertheless, he conceded. So now you've got a Muslim communist is the Democrat nominee for governor of New York City. So you're going to kind of combine a radical Islamic ideology with communism, and that's supposed to work in an American city. He is a charismatic guy. I got to give him that. He looks good on TV. He's walking around, glad handing, shaking hands with people. And part of what he wants is um, apparently there's a housing shortage in New York City and it costs too much. So he wants to put a ceiling on rent increases, which is going to lead to more of a housing shortage. He believes that groceries cost too much, and he advocates the city owning all the grocery stores. I believe he wants to, for lack of a better word, nationalize, or I don't know, New York eyes or city eyes, the grocery stores in New York City. I believe his plan is to use predatory pricing. So he will use subsidies to have prices to where the city sells things at a loss and puts the private bodegas out of business. And then the city will have a monopoly on grocery sales. He wants to have the city totally in charge of all transit and make it free. Um, he wanted a wage and price controls. He wants to make the minimum wage $30 an hour in New York City. Um, and he had a couple. He wants to like defund or abolish the police and have social workers hired in place of them. But then one of his taglines where he says he wants to fight Donald Trump's fascism. Well, if you look at his agenda, he's a lot closer to a city version of National Socialism than Donald Trump could ever dream of being. It's once again, it's that leftist hypocrisy that comes right out. Um, he can't really tell you how this is all supposed to work. He wants to raise taxes on higher income people. Yeah, that sounds great, Bernie Sanders wannabe, but uh, what's going to happen if a lot of these really wealthy people decide to leave New York City? I remember a couple years ago, New Jersey had a billionaire hedge fund manager, and he left and went to Florida. And the state legislature actually had to convene to rebalance their budget because he blew such a hole in it by leaving New Jersey. It's all great to hate the rich and everything, but you want more rich people living in your jurisdiction. You don't want fewer of them. It seems that we have a lot of politicians in the country who seem to hate the rich, but they want to import millions of more poor people, which doesn't make any kind of sense at all. But that's another issue for another day. Um, you know, he now is the winner in the primary, and the Republican nominee is Curtis Sliwa. If that name sounds familiar, it should. He founded the Guardian Angels. Now, he's not exactly a young man. He's got to be in his 70s by now, but he was the founder of the Guardian Angels. They were the Red Berets, and they don't really act like law enforcement, but they're kind of a deterrent to crime. They if they see an old lady getting mugged, they'll stop her or whatever. But anyway, he is running as a Republican, and Eric Adams, the current mayor, who is pretty incompetent, but he actually looks good compared to this Mamdani guy. Eric Adams, the current mayor, is considering running as an independent in November. And I believe Andrew Cuomo was even thinking of running as an independent, but now I think he's not going to do that. So you could have a situation where New York City voters have a choice between Mamdani, the Muslim communist, and he calls himself a democratic socialist, but come on, there's not much of a difference there. He's basically call him a neo-Marxist. But anyway, you'll have him running against Curtis Sliwa and possibly Eric Adams, an independent. Now, there is a chance that if Eric Adams, who's a Democrat, runs as an independent, it could split the left-leaning vote between Mamdani and Adams, which might enable Curtis Sliwa to win. I don't see that happening, but it is possible. It's New York City. Anything can be possible. I mean, you would think that after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, that New York City would kind of be leery of having a Muslim as their mayor, especially with all the Jewish people who live there. The guy's not exactly a fan of Jewish people or Israel either. Yeah, very interesting times in which we live. But the guy, I got to give it to you, man. He's very charismatic. He handles himself well on the camera, and he sure does talk a good game. But he just can't tell you how it's really going to work. That he doesn't seem to understand how economics works very well. But then again, it doesn't matter whether he understands it or not. If you have a couple million voters who don't understand, who are easily manipulated, well, then he's probably going to win in a big percentage. Then, when his ideas get implemented and they don't work, rich people start leaving, the problems don't get solved, the police get handcuffed, no pun intended, and are less able to do their job, crime will escalate, which is going to cause tax revenues to decrease because you may have less commerce. A lot of your rich people are going to leave. Then, when things fail, the city is going to demand that the state bail them out. Well, New York State is not exactly, you know, run what you would call effectively under Kathy Hochul. They have their own problems. So now they're going to come to the federal government and want a bailout. And it's funny how, if you ever talk to a dyed-in-the-wool communist or a neo-Marxist or a progressive or whatever kind of label they want to apply to themselves, they can't really, they don't admit that their ideas, they sound good, but they don't admit their ideas never work. They'll just tell you that, well, communism can work. We just need to have the right people in charge of it. Or if you point to a place like North Korea or China or the old Soviet Union or Cuba or even Venezuela, they'll say, well, that wasn't real socialism or that's not real communism. Well, yeah, it is. It's not communism how they envision it, but that's how it always turns out. I can't really find any country in the world that went communist and became a success overnight. It doesn't happen that way. When I lived in Germany, not only did I actually visited East Germany when it was still communist when I was younger. That was quite an experience. But I visited Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Thuringia, which is what used to be East Germany. And if you talk to people who actually lived under communism, I've met people from Romania and Hungary and the Czech Republic, or now they call it Czechia. But if you've ever met people who lived under communism, none of them are advocates of it. They're like, no, don't do it. But yet here in the United States, we have millions of our own people, especially on a college campus and in places like New York City, who think communism can work. They believe that they have to have the right people running it. And of course, if you give them unlimited money and unlimited power, they can really make it work this time. I fear that New York City may be headed in that direction. The city's always had financial problems, and I think back in the 70s, I think they had to get a federal bailout or something. But nevertheless, it was an interesting campaign during the primary. And this guy's he's young, he's got energy, and he apparently only became a citizen about 7 years ago. He came as a child and got his citizenship. I think it was 2018. I think he was born in Uganda, but his parents are from India or something like that. Interesting backstory. I got to give him that. Um, he's a walking example of diversity, but the people in New York City are just, geez. Um, a lot of people like to lay hate on Giuliani, but at least, he made some sense, and the city was a little safer under his leadership. I didn't agree with the stop and frisk nonsense because that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. But nevertheless, he did crack down on a lot of the criminal element. Even Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg is a tyrannical little evil little man, very authoritarian, but at least he was competent. He's wasn't my cup of tea at all, but at least he knew how to make things happen. He knew how to make things work. He was competent. But De Blasio was really bad. Eric Adams, I think he started off okay, but the immigration thing really got him because they kind of New York kind of got what they wanted. Well, we want all these illegal aliens in the country, but then when they ended up coming to his city, he was like, "Well, no, we can't handle it. We don't want them all here." Well, your party is the one who invited them in and facilitated them coming here. It's easy to pop smoke at Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis, the governors of Texas and Florida, for shipping some of the migrants up to New York City, but it wasn't the governors of Florida and Texas who invited the illegal aliens into the country. That was the blue state leaders and blue state politicians who did that. Apparently, they wanted all these millions of people coming into the country, but not where we live, not Martha's Vineyard, not New York City, not Chicago. Why are they all coming here? We just want them to go somewhere else. Well, sometimes, the old saying is be careful what you ask for, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. But that's my take on it. It's going to be interesting election season. Um, I haven't lived in New York since the 70s. I was a kid and we lived upstate, up in Orange County, along the Hudson River. But anyway, I you watch the news and it's just constantly strange. It's like, you know, not that I'm a fan of Donald Trump, but you can't go around calling Donald Trump an authoritarian or a fascist when you want the government at your state, city, or even federal level to be totally in control of transportation, housing, communication, agriculture, grocery stores, rent, you name it. You're acting more like a fascist than Donald Trump is. And people will tell you that fascism and communism are, polar opposites. Like you've got fascism on the far right, communism on the far left. Well, they're more like two sides of the same coin. A fascist and a communist agree very strongly on the ends. They just disagree violently on the means to achieve it. They're both evil ideologies and they're both totalitarian in nature. They're both spawned from collectivism. They just take a different approach to it. Under fascism, you can have private property, you can have private businesses. Under communism, the state owns everything. But under fascism, you can have private business. The state still controls it. If you don't do as the state says, you end up with a bullet in your head, or you end up sent to the gulag. So don't fall for that. That they're opposites. They're more like two wings on the same bird, or two sides of the same coin, or two evil twins spawned from collectivism. So don't fall for that. But to the people in New York City, I wish you the best of luck. New York City is one of those places where the two happiest times are the minute you get there and the minute you leave. When you get there, it's exciting and you can't wait to get some New York pizza, to walk around downtown, and the bustle and the hustle and the eclectic shops, and It's really cool to see it. But there's nothing. The last time I was in New York City was 2012. And when I went through I believe it was the Lincoln Tunnel, I was never, ever so happy after driving through Manhattan in a rental car. I was never happier to see a sign that says New Jersey welcomes you. And I really don't like New Jersey, but it was a it was a sight for sore eyes to be in New Jersey. So if you go to New York City, you got to get one of those soft pretzels. They sell them like at Penn Station or something. It's like the size of a steering wheel, big soft pretzel. Another really good thing in New York City, those little hot dog stands outside of an office building. I don't know if it's the water in New York City or whatever, but they've got these hot dogs boiling in water on this cart, and the guy will take the hot dog. He's got the sauerkraut, the mustard, the ketchup, the chili, whatever you want on it. Get yourself a hot dog and the pizza. Everybody up there sells pizza by the slice, and it's a big slice, but it's got like that little bit of orange grease floating on the top of it. There's just something about New York City. I don't know if it's the water or what, but just the way they do pizza, it's like no place else in the world. So, but yeah, once you get, but if you go in the summertime, the subway always smells like urine. Like when you go down the steps into the subway, it's like, but they have cleaned it up a little bit. But I haven't been there in the last couple of years, but I understand the crime is way up there. For a while they clean. It was really bad back in the 70s, and then they kind of cleaned things up a little bit, and now it seems to be getting worse again. I was watching a lot of videos, and people go in the subways and push people down, and this guy was going around smacking women. What's funny is the guy who was doing that was on video, and he looked a little bit like Zohran Mamdani, just a little bit, but with missing a few teeth, but he had a resemblance to him. But yeah, the Big Apple may be rotten a little bit, but hopefully the people in New York City will do the right thing, because people in New York, they're not really stupid. Sometimes they have bad judgment, but people up there generally do think pretty quickly on their feet. And most people from New York are pretty straightforward. They'll say what's on their mind. They don't beat around the bush. At least generally you'll know how they feel if you talk to them for a minute or two. But anyway, whatever you're doing, it's going to be another hot one today. So stay inside if you can. If you got to go outside, drink plenty of water. Well, that's my stream for today. And here's a bad joke to close things out. Um, these two guys were talking, and the guy said, "Hey, how'd you meet your girlfriend?" He said, "Well, I met her when I worked at a glue factory." He says, "Really? You met your girlfriend at a glue factory?" And he says, "Yes, I did. We bonded immediately." Peace out.